I've seen many people grow into this field, grow into this environmental management area or realm of livestock production, perhaps taking over this area, as being that person responsible while other persons handle maybe more of the reproduction or other aspects to the operation. Um, you can have some specific training in this field. It might be more in some nutrient management, some soil science, or maybe some engineering background. But really, what it takes is, I think, first and foremost, a desire to make the environment part of the broader system and make it work for the system.
Swine It.
Hello, and welcome to the Swine It Podcast. I'm Dr. Tara Donovan, your host, and I'd like to introduce my guest today, Dr. Erin Cortus. Dr. Cortus is an associate professor and extension engineer at the University of Minnesota. Welcome back to our show, Erin.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here.
So Dr. Cortus and I met a little over a year ago on this show where we were talking about the development of a sustainability program in livestock operations. So today we're going to narrow that focus a little bit and talk about leadership in swine production, skills for tomorrow's managers, and kind of dig in a little bit on what a farm manager, production manager can do on their specific farm. So Erin, let's start with you sharing some of your background and career path with us.
Sure. I'm trained as an agricultural engineer. I went to school at the University of Saskatchewan, and in the course of my undergrad and then graduate program, I worked at the Prairie Swine Center in the engineering team, but as part of the Prairie Swine Center, I was exposed to production practices as well as nutrition and ethology in the course of my program, and so gave me I feel a really nice sense of all that it takes to raise pigs. Following that, I did some work at Purdue University as a postdoc in a national air emissions monitoring project, and since then I've been at South Dakota State University and now University of Minnesota in an extension and research role.
Thank you. So a lot of knowledge and years of experience in this area that can really help our swine producers.
My career has gone in different directions over time because of some changes in my roles and positions, but it really has centered in on the environment and how can we make the environment support our animals, our workers, as well as the surrounding communities.
So let's dig in a little bit. So what are the environmental management roles on a swine farm?
I would say they've changed a little bit in my perspective over time. Originally, I would say it was more that manure management role, right? How do we manage that manure effectively, make effective use of the nutrients? A long time ago, it was like, how do we dispose of them properly? But now, so it's how do we use those nutrients? How do we recycle them, right? That's our mindset, I would say now, when it comes to manure nutrient management, including the storage part of it. But I feel a growing need also on the environmental side to recognize some of the other environmental impacts or tangibles related to our livestock production. And that can include air quality impacts, can include greenhouse gas accounting, wildlife habitats. The list is broadening. And so it requires some different skill sets as well.
Right. So what are the opportunities for those production managers or farm managers in this area?
I've seen many people grow into this field, grow into this environmental management area or realm of livestock production, perhaps taking over this area, as being that person responsible while other persons handle maybe more of the reproduction or other aspects to the operation. You can have some specific training in this field. It might be more in some nutrient management, some soil science, or maybe some engineering background. But really what it takes is, I think, first and foremost, a desire to make the environment part of the broader system and make it work for the system.
Yeah, and that's where that leadership role comes in, right? So, this is the focus, and, not necessarily, like you mentioned, the reproduction. It's not just something I also have to do, but really the focus of this area of the farm.
Yeah, I think a good place to start is if we're talking about developing leaders in this area, regardless of the size of farm, regardless of the type of farm, I think a place where even just a person can start is thinking through an environmental policy statement is for a farm. And I have some templates and guides available, and they're available through the livestock and poultry environmental learning community as well. But I think it's a good practice, hone some of those leadership skills to start with, but also bring more of all of the persons on the operation into a common mindset when it comes to environmental management for now, but also moving into the future.
Yeah, great. So one of my questions was, is there a guide? So, you just mentioned there's, it sounds like a group or an organization website that they can go to. Certainly contact you, Dr. Cortus, and you can lead people in the right direction. Are there some training extension things that go on in the rural areas?
When it comes to, let's just start with nutrient management. Most states, most areas do have some specific training programs that are required as part of permits, both local, state, or national programs. And so those are a great place to start for some basic training. They often rely and pull from a lot of local extension programs and experts. So those are great resources to dive deeper when you're ready for that. When it comes to some more of the sustainability topics, there's, I would say, fewer fewer guides and fewer instruction manuals on how to do that. But I think, starts with a desire to learn more, a desire to understand, and just get comfortable in those conversations about sustainability and environmental impacts related to livestock.
Yeah, absolutely. It always seems like to me, I read or hear about some negative, pieces around that, and really, it is a positive story, and one that we can grow and learn and promote, right, in terms of our programs.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are hard conversations that we feel or that we want to get involved in when it comes to environmental impact, because we have to we have to acknowledge that livestock production does have an environmental impact, but so do most of the things that we do in life. And so I think the first step is recognizing our responsibility in that, and recognizing what it is that we are impacting, but also the acknowledge the decisions we're making in that process. Our decisions are never made in a vacuum on a livestock farm. They're balancing out a lot of different aspects, a lot of different factors, a lot of different criteria. And so, if we are cognizant of what these environmental impacts are, but we're also cognizant of the decisions behind what we're doing, that's taking responsibility for what we're doing. Doesn't mean that we can't change and won't ever change. And that's, I guess, that growth that we look for as well. And that's through effective leadership too, seeing what's possible and how do we make things happen.
Yeah. Have you seen progress in this area?
I've seen quite a bit of change, especially in swine in particular. I think some of it's been, uh, I think some of it's come through a recognition by the industry as a whole that swine has a story to tell, and with some data behind our story about swine production, we can tell that story more effectively and also find room for growth. So I think through some industry initiatives, we've had opportunity for some growth. Part of that has been the industry. The National Pork Board has offered some assistance in providing environmental impact statements, for example, or assessments, I should say, that give individual farms, some tangible numbers for a given operation. And I think first of all, having those numbers, whether you call it a baseline or just a report, it gives a sense that there is some impact, but then also gives some dimensions as to where is there potential for movement as well. So it helps us recognize where are we not stagnant. So I think that's been a valuable tool in promoting some growth and promoting some recognition that, yes, as swine farmers, as livestock producers, as crop farmers, we have impact, but we can also show some benefits as well, and benefit our industry, but also the whole ag supply chain.
Yeah, and I agree. Just going through that process of, the National Pork Board has sort of set out a template for your farm, and how to gain some of the numbers and understand. And just doing that process will, give you information about your farm and make you think a little bit deeper about it for sure.
Yeah, I think it helps us recognize how interconnected the environmental management and some of this accounting. Right now, it's I would say more of an accounting exercise for greenhouse gas impacts, at least, than anything. I mean, the data that you're pulling together for annual taxes and auditing is very similar to what goes into these greenhouse gas accounting reports. So a lot of interconnected decisions, like we've talked about earlier.
So, Erin, can you describe a farm or tell us about a system that you feel their environmental management program is successful, or you've seen it grow, and maybe some detail about how that worked?
Yeah, I think where I've seen particular growth, and it's not any one farm, but I would say where I've seen quite a bit of interest is where we have some integrated swine and crop production. And part of that is because I think it's even more apparent some of that circularity that we have with our nutrients and the cycling of carbon and other nutrients, from the crops that are produced, that go into the feed, that go into the animals, that go into the manure, that go back to the soil, and keep that cycle going. And so I think where we have integrated crop and livestock production is where I see perhaps more interest. I think part of that is because on the feed production side, feed, especially if we're talking greenhouse gas input, feed is close to half of a greenhouse gas footprint for pig production and for most stages of production. And so when we can make some changes in our crop production, that has a big impact down the way as far as a greenhouse gas footprint for swine production. And so where you have some control over that crop production, right, there's some decision-making power. When we don't have integrated crop and livestock production, that doesn't mean that there's nothing nothing anyone can do, and it doesn't mean that people are not good environmental stewards. But I'm just seeing a lot more, perhaps, growth and within organizations when they have a bit more of that control on the feed production side. On the manure management side, there is that's in very broad terms, the other half of the footprint, the feed production and the manure management. And I think I've seen, just some even small steps by farms that have been, listening and paying attention to what are some steps, like even just changing that frequency of manure application can have an impact. And so these are some of the things that, let's say, some of the, I wouldn't say easy lifts, but some of the steps that I've seen evolving over time based on some of these reports and just some of the growing knowledge that we have about environmental impacts, specifically greenhouse gas impacts. I think swine producers have always led the way when it comes to nutrient management and effective use of manure and storage of that manure. But I think there's been a lot of traction in other areas as well.
Yeah, and what you mentioned, at the beginning in terms of the, crop production, if you have an integrated system, you have a bit more of a connectiveness. But there's a lot of farms that I think purchase their grain from the same producers in the same places, year after year. And so just gaining that knowledge and having a collaborative conversation about their practices can, basically build some knowledge and power into a specific farms program. So that's networking, right?
Exactly. Um, I don't think there's any case where any environmental goals can be met single-handedly by any one farm. It does take that network. And so I think that's part of that leadership development, especially in this environmental arena, is being prepared to have those hard conversations when we don't necessarily know all of the science, all the different terminology, and we're maybe diving into realms that we're not as familiar with, like, let's say, diving into some of the crop production. But it does force us to have those conversations, to learn more and ask some of those questions, like even just simply asking for any product that comes onto a farm, is there a footprint for this particular product that I can use in my own reporting? I mean, that's a very big question and probably not necessary for every single item that comes onto a farm, but for these big items, including, working with local feed mills, I think it gets the conversation moving, just beyond our farm gate.
So I'm going to circle back just one more time on, how does a producer get started? So maybe recap a little bit for us on, if you were a swine, either production manager or a swine farm owner, what would be your first steps?
The first step to getting involved on the environmental management side is learning about the nutrient management plans and how that manure is handled, and just being, whether you're part of the actual planning process, working through the calculations of where the manure is going and how it's being used. I mean, that's probably that deeper step, but just being part of that nutrient management planning in general, I think is a good first step. And that's supported through your local extension offices as well as NRCS and, our regulatory agencies as well. Um, Past that, to get to get deeper into maybe some of the sustainability metrics, there's quite a few extension specialists that are diving into this area. There's a lot of private programs, but then also the National Pork Board's initiative to provide those environmental assessments to folks is another way to to see some tangible numbers and to start those conversations going a little bit deeper into what's possible for my given farm. I also want to make one plug that I think environmental management is a place where we can get youth more involved in farming. Oftentimes, right, we're trying to find roles for different people, different skill sets, and when it comes to environmental management, I think that's where we can use some of our youth and maybe foster, before they're even graduated from high school, foster some of that desire to go further and advance maybe some deeper skills when it comes to engineering, nutrient management, soil science, or accounting, what have you, right? But I think starting with our youth and these exercises that I've just talked about, nutrient management planning, environmental assessments, I mean, many of them are just spreadsheet tools, Excel spreadsheet tools, or um, can be done with freely available online calculators. And so I think it's a way to get more people involved in an operation, whether they're family or not. It's a way to bring a next generation onto a livestock farm and foster new leaders.
Yeah, I love that you brought up, the youth and trying to stimulate some of that desire to learn, right? And so, early grades, and I'll say if you are part of agriculture and you have the opportunity to speak in a science class or an ag class, or go to your local communities, I think that really helps for those the youth that maybe don't have the exposure to the farm, but can start just a budding interest in, the sustainability, which isn't just, a cow or a pig. It's, a lot more than that.
Definitely. And as I mentioned, a lot of these environmental impact assessments, especially on the greenhouse gas side, are kind of an accounting exercise. So in the course of getting a greenhouse gas number, right, you're looking at all of those inputs that it takes to make a farm operate on an annual basis. So I think it's just an exposure to the broader operation in the course of developing environmental leaders.
Yeah, very good. So, Dr. Cortus, we're finishing our time together. Again, we're talking about how we can foster leadership with our swine production managers and on the farm about sustainability and specifically environmental management. Before we get to our ending few questions, do you want to share any final thoughts or take homes, or maybe a challenge to the industry?
I think for me personally, right, when I look at, or what's a successful leader look like to me, responsibility, taking responsibility is key for me. And that's what I look for in the leaders who guide me, and that's what I try my best to emulate for my staff and students as well. So environmental responsibility, environmental stewardship, I don't think with environmental management we're ever looking at getting all our numbers to a zero. I think we're looking at really that stewardship, that responsibility, being responsible for our choices.
So if you have questions or comments about our show, please don't hesitate to contact Dr. Erin Cortus. She's at the University of Minnesota. You can also send a comment on the platform during this podcast as you're watching it. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up if you liked our show, and we'll move into our 3 questions that give us an opportunity to get to know our guests just a little bit better.
It's time for our famous 3.
Fortiva is moving beyond feed additives to create foundational ingredients that work with your pig's physiology to support resilience and health. With proven technologies like Ambatine, Flow Matrix, and Endura, Fortiva helps you address the toughest challenges in swine production. From gut health to growth performance, together we can make animals more resilient in the face of future challenges. Learn how at FortivaImpact.com.
So, Erin, give us your favorite book or resource in your area of expertise. What's your go-to?
My go-to book has been my one of my textbooks that I first bought in my 3rd year of engineering, and that's Environment Control for Animals and Plants by Lewis Albright. In the course of talking about environmental management, it's a book that everyone seems to reference, and so it's been sitting on my shelf and fairly well thumbed over the last 20 years.
All right. And what about book or resource outside of ag? Just something that might be of interest.
I think the latest book that I read that's inspired me to look at how I operate is that Atomic Habits book.
Sure.
It's been great at just helping me think through how can I make small changes to make a big impact.
Excellent. And you already shared, your thoughts about responsibility, but share with us an attribute or characteristic that you feel sets successful professionals apart from others.
I think it's a sense of self, recognizing what you can do, what you need to ask others to do, and just being okay with that, being okay with what you can do and what you need help with, kind of a humility aspect. But to me, that's also another key attribute to successful leaders. Be real.
Well, very good. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been really great to see you again and hear some of your thoughts and guides for us on really taking that leadership role out in the environmental management side.
Thank you for having me.